A while back, Reddit user Seymour Parker posted this picture on an Arabic learning subreddit. Seymour found the sticky notes inside the kitchen of his new house and wanted to know its meaning. User Realistic While provided a translation of the text, and user Somebody the Great says it's just a prayer, don't worry. I asked OP some questions myself, then proceeded to pump out a whole page of deductions based on this picture. To sum the matter up, here's the entirety of the information exchange if it was a conversation.
So I just moved into a new house and found this note in the kitchen. What does it mean? The place was rented by an Iraqi family before, if that helps.
Where in the kitchen did you find this?
It was taped to the kitchen wall.
Was this the only thing the previous owners left behind?
Yep.
Okay, time to do some Sherlocking. The note was written by a right-handed, native Arabic speaker. The previous residents were likely a refugee family. They had lived in Turkey around 5 to 10 years ago, during which time a member of the family fell seriously ill and was hospitalized. The writer went to visit the sick on a rainy day, wrote out the prayer while in the hospital, tucked the notes into his pockets when he left, carried it around and frequently pulled it out to pray with. The patient fortunately made a recovery, and this note was brought with the family as they moved abroad to where you are. This prayer was then placed at a prominent spot as a reminder of how the family's faith carries them through hardship. They left the notes behind on purpose during their recent move, likely because it belonged to a distant past, but also possibly as a good luck charm for you. Other people responded pretty positively to my comments. User Paperwavement says, "Holy Sherlocking is right!" Another Redditor says, "Sherlock Holmes never died, I now have proof." User Lilithly likes my comment so much that she shared the comment on the best of subreddits. That's a pretty nice clickbait title. I might borrow it for my video. Anyways, that post got a bit of attention. Some peeps were impressed by the deductions, while others thought it was all just baseless conjectures. User Tractus actually took the time to write a super long rebuttal to my points. So how reliable were the things I deduced from this picture? I'll let you be the judge. I will now go through the logical reasonings behind each inference that I made. I'll also insert excerpts of Tractus's questions here and there, as well as my own response to his rebuttals. Off we go! My first point was that the writing's from a native Arabic speaker. User Tractus commented,
"What's the evidence for that? Could someone not learn to write Arabic like this as a second language?"
Regarding that possibility, I would say that a learner, however experienced and proficient with the language, is bound to write in a more structured and rigid way. Take the dots on the note as an example. The writer wrote both single and double dots as slashes. For context, short vowels in Arabic are not written out. To help non-native speakers pronounce the words, diacritics are added above or beneath letters to signify hidden sounds. You'll notice that diacritics often take the form of slashes. A learner would have carefully distinguished dots that are part of the letters from diacritics that they'd be accustomed to seeing. Also note the way letter ya was written like ayn. Pay special attention to the alifs that were occasionally elevated above other letters and were much shorter than standard would dictate. Learners who have carefully cultivated their letter arrangements would never dream of doing these things. Moving on. I believe the writing conveys a sense of unrest. The writer was in a stressful situation where he felt out of control but could take no immediate action. Now, I don't know whether the writer was a man or a woman. I'm only saying he for the sake of convenience.
There isn't sufficient evidence to infer the circumstance. The messiness could be because the writer was making a joke, trying out different writing styles, trying to improve their writing speed, or writing under physically awkward but not necessarily stressful conditions such as bad lighting or turbulence.
These alternatives are valid, and I would like to make the disclaimer that my speculations are based on what's comparatively probable among numerous possibilities. It's often the only thing you can go off of without physically being at the scene. Now, we can rule out the possibility of the messiness having been the result of bad lighting or turbulence. The writing wasn't pretty, but it was consistent throughout the page. The rest of the alternatives may explain the messy writing, but fail to incorporate other factors, such as the various stains and folds, and how the note ended up on the kitchen wall in an entirely different country. I will go into greater depth regarding these details.
How do we know the writer could take no immediate actions?
The writing consistency shows that the writer was not in any haste. If the assumption of stress was correct, and the writer could do something about his circumstance, he'd have rushed to finish writing the prayer. Next, pay attention to the Turkish printing on the bottom left. There are 3 locations of the Ersoy hospital, all of which are located on the far northwest side of Turkey. That is as far from Iraq as you can get. This suggests that the family was not simply touring Turkey when a member chanced to fall ill. The family could be perpetual travelers that frequently migrated between countries, first to Turkey, then to where Seymour lived. But Istanbul has a huge refugee population, and I've known a few refugee families that resided in Turkey before relocating to Canada. Hence, I deem it more probable that this was a family of refugees.
But do Mexicans not tour New England? Do Germans not tour Bordeaux?
Iraq touches borders with Turkey. When a family tours a neighboring nation, they're very likely to visit the site close to their home, not the absolute faraway end. But of course, the skepticism towards my conclusion is valid. Turning our attention to the bottom right of the note, this phone number is not the current number of the hospital. Given the moderate aging of the sticky notes and the publication time of the hospital site, I estimate the family's hospital visit to be in the early 2010s. This is also accounting for a couple of years over which they left Turkey, moved to a new house, and lived there until it was rented to Seymour.
To my untrained eyes, that note could be anywhere from 6 weeks to 50 years old.
The aging of paper indeed depends on the material, but I have a piece of printing paper sitting out in the open for 4 years as reference. Looks fresher than the sticky note here.
Can a specific date range for that phone number be established via the Wayback Machine or old directories?
Great call. After a bit of research, I found out that the phone number was in use between late May 2010 to late March 2019, when they gave a notice of number change. Fits my time estimate, but does not narrow things down a lot.
The number doesn't tell us when the note was written, only when the paper was printed.
Fantastic point. My own hypothesis would only work on top of the assumption that the note was written while inside the hospital, which I deem to be likely. More on that in a moment. In addition to the texts, there is a large but not thorough water stain on the paper. This is unusual even for a kitchen wall item, hence it most likely rained on the day of their hospital visit.
What's that note on your wall? Let me take it to the window to read it better. Dang, it's raining. Looks like I got it wet. Or even more reasonably, careful with that boiling water. It's splashing everywhere. Oh, now look what you've done.
Several drops of boiling water wouldn't have been over half of an entire note on the wall. Direct contact to any rain drop would have smeared the words much more, possibly causing damage to the paper itself. We see that the writing is slightly smeared under the water stain, implying that the exposure to liquid indeed took place shortly after the note was written. I experimented by getting older writing slightly wet. No deformity occurred. Walking in the rain while holding this in the open would have left scattered watermarks or a thorough soak. The odd water stain on the note was most likely from exposure to moisture through a pocket. Quick aside, the oil splatters do not smear the writing underneath and were hints from a long time after the incident, when the notes got hung up on the kitchen wall.
We can't tell whether the note's text was written at the hospital. It's not unusual for writing pads to be taken place to place unused for weeks, even years.
You brought up very valid points. Many other editors also think that the writer was simply memorizing a prayer at home. It could be that a member of the family worked at the hospital and brought home a stack of sticky notes. Iraqi degrees aren't recognized abroad, and Turkey did not do work permits for refugees until 2016, so I deem it more likely for the writer to have been on the patient side. The brought home explanation also fails to address the inward folding and wrinkling, which happened to this particular piece of notes. If the note was taken home, written on from indoors, and put onto the wall then and there, how did it bear all the signs of having been carried around? Accidental folding of the first sticky notes within a stack would not have been directed inwards, especially not at the halfway points. Instead, if a single sticky note had been deliberately folded on the glue side, then carried in a pocket, it'd have taken extra applied glue to keep it on the wall for years to come. Some form of significance was assigned to the notes for it to end up where it was. Paradoxically, the writer took no effort in preserving these notes, because at the time of writing, the notes had not gained its significance. The negligence could also be due to the writer's mind being occupied by more pressing subjects, worrying about the sick. I believe the family had a member becoming seriously ill. For a random hospital sticky note to be carried all the way around the world, pasted at a conspicuous spot in the house, and remain there for years. The events behind this note, which the family went through, must have had tremendous meaning. The content of this prayer also supplements my inference regarding the desperate's context.
This story doesn't account for how the note could get exposed to rain. If anything, it complicates that explanation. Why write and take a note outside if you're visiting a patient in a hospital?
Consider the following sequence of events. The writer acquired and wrote on the note while in the hospital, next to his sick relative. Recovery would have taken days, if not weeks, so visitors would inevitably leave at intervals. A short walk might also relieve emotional burdens. Though the writer physically left, his thoughts were with the sick, hence he tucked the prayer into a pocket, intending to read it at other locations, causing the folding and wrinkling. It was sprinkling outside, so the fresh writing got smeared. My analysis of the water stain indicates that the note was never pulled out in the rain and was absolutely not written outside. The note was unlikely to have been written by the patient him or herself, or by another Arabic speaker they chanced to encounter while at the hospital. If so, the note would not have been carelessly carried around and subjected to deliberate folding.
Why not? Wouldn't the person most likely to write a prayer in a hospital be a patient? There is selective reasoning being made here.
Imagine a sick child writing out a prayer, then handing it to his parents who is worried sick. Would the parents have freely let the notes get damaged? For all the parents knew, this could be the last thing he'd receive from the kid. It is possible that the patient wrote the note and kept it to him or herself, instead of giving it to a visitor. Although someone sick enough to be hospitalized was unlikely to walk outside in the rain immediately after writing this prayer. Again, I'm merely speculating on what I find to be more likely.
The text could have been written after the note was carelessly carried in that fashion.
That is a brilliant point which I did not consider. However, look at the yamut at the end. The top of ya was damaged along the wrinkling, indicating that the writing indeed took place before the folding occurred.
A reasonable inference that the note is connected to some significant family event. An unreasonable inference what that event was.
I favor the hospital hypothesis because it fits all the facts, especially the paradox of why a note of significance was initially treated with less discretion than it deserved. The note's significance sprung from the recovery of a patient after the fact. Had the prayer been written by the patient or a sympathetic bystander, it would have gained its significance on the spot. I do not deny that there are other viable possibilities, but I have not managed to devise another explanation that takes into account all the clues we've discussed. I said that the patient recovered, because had things taken a turn for the worse, the family would have discarded the notes as an avoidance to unpleasant memories.
Reality doesn't always make sense as we expect. Perhaps the patient did die.
I absolutely agree that reality rarely makes sense as fictions do. But considering how people remember tragedies more than the difficulties they'd overcome, the family would have been less inclined to leave the notes behind if it had been a memorial. Keeping a reminder of a dead relative right in your kitchen would also be a bit morbid, but you're correct that human behaviors could be hard to predict. Finally, the audio splatters suggest that the note was on the kitchen wall as opposed to in the cabinet. I asked Seymour where he found the note to confirm this point. Since the note was easily visible in the room, we can rule out the possibility that the owners forgot about the note while packing. Given that Seymour had not found anything else of interest left by the previous owners, their leaving of the note was definitely intentional. The note was from a long, distant past, so they likely decided to leave it where it was. Or they might have seen it as a sort of good luck charm and left it behind for the next person who would inhabit their home. That's the entire story. There were quite a few peculiarities regarding the notes. The most notable features here are the folding and the half-page water stain, combining together to point to the fact that this hospital note was pocketed and taken outdoors shortly after being written on. It hence makes you wonder why the note was initially treated haphazardly, despite having been associated with a family event so significant that the note was not only brought abroad, but also prominently displayed on the kitchen wall. So, what do you think is the story behind this note? Do you think my deductions hit the nail on the head? Or were they just unfounded assertions? That's all for now, folks. I'll see you later.